Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good afternoon, friends. I'm very excited about today's episode, and I'll tell you why in a sec. But before I do, a couple updates. So we've just been peppered. We've been blitzed. We've been bombarded with questions about Glimpse Video. So I decided to reach back out to Terry and Gloria Crawford. They're the founders of Glimpse Video. And we had them on the podcast a year and a half ago. And so I'm interviewing them again this Wednesday. And so you can look for even a deeper dive into Glimpse as it spreads from school to school. That'll run mid-November. Also, many of you have reached out and asked about the scholarship session that we did, and if you could get the video. I see those emails. I just got to get through November 1st first. Once we get through November 1st, then I'll be able to get that out to all you guys who've requested that. Also, it's time for us to start thinking again about College Counselor Confab, because we're 3 months away from launching the new version. I'll have multiple announcements, pairing up with Michelle Silvernagle from the great state of Washington to co-lead that moving forward. It's going to go to a monthly meeting, and we're asking for people who commit to at least 7 of the 12. But if you're interested in being considered as one of the college counselors in our College Counselor Confab, just so you know, we are really looking right now for several groups of counselors. We're looking for more school-based counselors, and that's both independent schools and public school, but people who are doing college counseling, and also CBO counselors. We need some more community-based organization counselors. So if you're interested, shoot an email to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Working on a contact form right now to make this process a little bit more formal, but we want to kick that off at the end of January. And so I'll be making several announcements between now and over the next 3 months. So we're very excited about version 2.0. Version 2.0. All right, so what's got me pumped about today? Well, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Some episodes fire me up more than others, and the ones that really fire me up are ones where I feel like I don't care how experienced you are, you're going to learn a lot. Those are the ones that get me jazzed. So I was pretty stoked about the 18 reasons why college aid awards are all over the place. And that was confirmed when 2 college counselors that started this work in the late 70s both reached out and said, I learned so much from that series that I didn't know. So that's the kind of thing that stokes me. And I feel like we do have that kind of episode for you today. The first part, our more experienced counselors may know this, but for many of you, it should be new. And it's a very exciting interview that I'm doing with David Hawkins, who is in senior level leadership at NACAC. He's been with NACAC since 2000, and they've been producing a state of college admissions report where they survey admission officers and actually ask them what counts the most when you make admissions decisions. And we're going to be walking through that factor by factor. What actually counts the most based on research? I'm really excited about this. At the end of my time with David, I was sort of bemoaning the fact that I didn't have more time with him, because they also have done another study where they ask high schools and they ask students, what do you think counts the most? And I was so pumped when David said, "Oh, come on back and do another hour." So we've already recorded 1 hour, first part, and recording the next hour a week from today. And so it'll run as a 4-parter. The segments will be a little longer, about 30 minutes each. And in the second part, we're going to get into where's the discrepancy between what students think matters and what admission officers say matter. So I'm very, very fired up about this 4-part interview. And then, but before we get to that, as I said, I'm sharing insights from NACAC. And one of the things that you kept hearing at NACAC, and if you're in the counseling world, you know this, is that more and more students are looking at Canadian universities. So I'm going to do an overview of Canadian universities with more depth than we've ever done before. And I'm convinced that even if you've been in this field for 4 or 5 decades, you're going to learn some things that you don't already know. And those are the episodes that get me the most stoked. So let's dive right in and start out with universities in Canada. First thing you need to know is that they come in all stripes and sizes, right? You have your large universities like your UBCs, University of British Columbia, your McGill's, Quebec, your University of Toronto, your Queen's in Kingston. By the way, I was born like really a stone's throw away from Queen's University. York in Toronto, Western University in London, University of Alberta. You got your big ones, then you have your medium sizes like your Dalhousie's in Halifax, Nova Scotia, 16,000. You have your small schools like Bishop's in Sherbrooke, Quebec, around 2,800. And then you have your, what I would call your tiny schools like your University of King's College in Halifax, Nova Scotia, about 900. You also have research-driven schools, vocational schools, trade schools. So that's very similar to here. So not a big distinction there. But let's get into where you will see some differences. So one of the biggest differences with Canadian universities and American universities is that almost all of the Canadian universities are publicly funded. In fact, 98%. So that's a lot. And usually when you see the private ones, they tend to be your trade schools. Now, what Canadians will say is they like this because, one, it makes almost all schools eminently affordable for all Canadians. And you'll hear later about how it's pretty affordable for Americans as well. We'll get more into that a little later. The other thing that Canadians will say is great is there's a consistent level of quality control that comes with the schools being public. Now, another big distinction is the culture. And the culture it puts more of a focus on the experience that you had and the subject matter that you were studying. The focus is not on the name recognition of the institution, the acceptance rate of the institution, the ranking of the institution, or you went to so-and-so. I'm not going to say that none of that exists at all, but there's a significant cultural difference between the focus on going to a brand name school or this is so-and-so with this ranking or low acceptance rate. It's really more on what did you study and what was your experience like. And you'll hear me say a little bit more about this later, but Canadian schools are really known for experiential education. So what experiences did you have outside the classroom is also another big focus. Another difference is that there's no national common app like you have over here. Most states literally don't have anything like that. Sorry, I'm going to say states a lot because I've been here for 40 plus years. Provinces, sorry. Most provinces don't have anything at all, even closely resembling a common app. The two exceptions would be British Columbia. They do have something called the Educational Planner BC portal. That's like kind of a main hub you can go to if you're applying to colleges in British Columbia. And then the OUAC. The OUAC is, you could almost call that like Ontario's version of a common app for people that go to school in Ontario, where you can apply through multiple schools on the same portal there. But nothing really like that for most of the schools in general in Canada. Students, for the most part, are going to not apply through the Educational Planner BC portal or the OUAC, but directly on the college website. And they are oftentimes applying to what Canadians refer to as the faculty of choice. Now, you just got to get used to some of this language. It's a little different, but there are US parallels. So think of this as the college within the university or the school within the university. So, simple case, University of Pennsylvania, you apply to University of Pennsylvania. You're picking, are you applying to arts and sciences? Are you applying to Wharton the business school? Are you applying to engineering? Or are you applying to school of nursing? They're like schools or colleges within the university. This is the same system Canada has, but they call them faculties, is a term that you'll see over there. Now, once again, within that faculty, you have lots of college majors, and you can move around amongst a major. You don't have to declare that I'm going to major in, journalism or marketing. You can pick and choose and move around after you've had a chance to explore. Much like U.S. schools there, after you try different courses, changing majors is not that difficult, just like it is over here. And once again, every school is different. I'm just telling you how most of them are set up and how most of them work. All right. Another big change in Canada is there is going to be a much less emphasis on whole person admissions, what we call holistic admissions. There are exceptions. Once again, their schools are all in all different stripes, but I'm talking about in general, much, much less emphasis on holistic admissions. In fact, I think of Canadian schools functioning a lot the way the CSUs do, the Cal State University schools do. And why do I say that? Well, you look at Cal State schools, they're really doing a transcript review, right? No test scores. They're not looking at your extracurriculars and teacher recommendations. This is the way most of the schools are going to function. It's going to be a transcript review, and most of the colleges are going to let you know what grade point average you need and what courses you need to take. So it's generally clear on the website, like whether or not you're going to be a competitive applicant. And therefore, another difference is that students apply to way less colleges over there. It's a lot like it used to be over here. It's not uncommon at all for people to apply to 3 schools, not uncommon at all. And they generally know, the programs they're applying to and whether they're going to get in. And so it does create much less anxiety about this whole process of getting in. And once again, I've already talked about there's not this obsession over trying to get in these low admit rate schools, and they're not seen as a measure of quality the way that oftentimes people think of in this country. Now, I know what you're thinking, Snap. You're trying to tell me all these extracurriculars I did don't count at all? Like, I worked hard. I feel like I accomplished a lot. Well, they do look at things. They look at things like volunteerism and work and extracurriculars. They actually do come into play, but they're not used for admission criteria. They're used more for scholarship criteria. So they do value those things, but more not on the acceptance level, more on the scholarship level. Another major difference is demonstrated interest. It is very, very, very rarely factored in. So they're not looking at whether they think you're going to come or not and factoring that into the admission decision. In fact, if you talk with admission officers at Canadian schools, they'll oftentimes get a chuckle because their American applicants are the ones that are like sending them all these emails and talking about, I love your school, it's great, it's my first choice, and thinking that they're scoring points. And it's not something like that a Canadian would do because they kind of know that's not really going to help me. But they get a lot of that from their U.S. schools. Another thing is they love IB and AP. They really do. And a lot of times you'll see scholarships can be attached to students doing well in IB and AP. Also, coming on transfer credits has a lot to do with how you've done in those advanced courses, and particularly those programs which they really know really well. I'm curious about the Cambridge system. That I don't know, but I would imagine that's seen very favorably as well, but I don't know that for sure. Now, cost. Well, if you have a Canadian passport, you get Canadian rates, which are, of course, going to be a lot lower. But if you don't, students get work-study permits, and that allows the students to work and get paid. Much, much easier in Canada than in the U.S. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Another thing is co-op is really big. So my brother went to University of Waterloo, known for its co-op program. It's sort of like the MIT in Canada in a lot of ways. Yeah, he was that math genius person that I was great at arithmetic, but as soon as I got to calculus, I was out. And he co-opted all over the place. I mean, he'd be all over the place doing co-ops and experiences. And so much so, when he got his master's at the University of Denver, he got very active with the leadership there, including the president. And they traveled to Waterloo, Northeastern, I think Drexel, but some places, several other schools, looking at their co-op model and seeing if they could bring it back. But to this day, he's really, really passionate about co-op. But co-op is the norm over there. Co-op is extremely, extremely common. It's the exception that doesn't have co-op. As you know, co-op, you're alternating between full-time work, full-time school. Internships are also really big, really, really big. And here's an admissions vernacular for you: work integrated learning. So they have what they call work integrated learning, and it's 20 hours a week during the school year and full-time on breaks. And the great thing is with the work study permit, Americans can do all that in your field, in your profession. Stay over the summer, work full time, stay over the breaks, work full time in your field, in your profession. Obviously, not only is that work experience, but a great way to pay for the cost of college. Now, scholarships are common, and most of the students that I work with who go to Canadian schools do get scholarships. So they give American merit scholarships out to American students, much more so than U.S. schools give merit scholarships out to international students. So that's another way to really make these schools affordable. And most of the scholarships are what? Here's another admissions vernacular, what we call auto merit or auto aid, meaning your admission application is your scholarship application, as opposed to doing a big, elaborate additional scholarship application. Now, another thing that can really make these schools affordable is exchange on the dollar. So that varies, but it's around 25 cents right now. You're saving immediately just on the exchange of the dollar, but it does fluctuate. So most of the schools in Canada, if you convert them to US dollars, they're like 30 to 50 all in. So there's considerable savings, and that's one of the reasons for their increased popularity. And a lot of these are like really world-class institutions. And that's before scholarships, by the way. That's just with, that is counting the exchange on the dollar. And one thing that you have to understand with Canadian schools, and we see it here in American schools, but not anywhere near as much. It's the norm in Canada, where I would say it's the exception over here. And here, boy, I'm all full of vernaculars today. Differential tuition. Differential tuition. So basically that means that you're going to pay a different amount for the School of Commerce, which is what they refer to as like their business school, engineering, and some of like the medical sciences, differential tuition rates. So you can see, like, especially in Quebec, some of the Quebec schools have like 4 different tuition rates. You can see, so if you're looking at the cost there, it can really range a lot on tuition depending on the program, the popularity of the program, the demand of the program. Now, they all have tuition calculators on every website, so those tuition calculators are there for you. Let me talk a little bit more about the study permit, because it's actually really important, and they've made it a little stricter than it used to be. So it is required to have a study permit to study in Canada, and you're going to need to get that study permit. And you can't get the permit until you first get an acceptance letter from a school. The school, you do an acceptance letter, you make a deposit. This isn't a visa. It's different from a student visa. It's not a requirement to have a visa, but then you have to go through this process to get the study permit. And once again, the study permit is going to allow you to work 20 hours part-time while in school, and full-time over summer and winter breaks. And by the way, they're about to make that 24 hours. They haven't quite done that yet, but they're in the process of switching it from 20 to 24 hours. But there's a couple steps involved in getting this. I mean, first, of course, you have to get your acceptance letter. And then, you have to do a few other things. So one of the things is something that, you may or may not know. It's true over here as well. You need to prove you have enough money in the bank to come over there. And so right now it's between 15 to 16,000. You have to show you have that in the bank. And you say, why are they getting all up in my business? Like, what's up with that? Well, think about it. Somebody comes over here, they're enrolled, and all of a sudden they say, I have no money. Well, it feels inhumane and it's complicated. And who wants to like immediately tell a kid they got to go back home and somehow get money for a plane ticket? Nor do you want to have to somehow tap into money that you never had budgeted for that in order to keep them there. And of course, everybody would exploit that. They knew that's all you had to do. So this is true for coming over here as well. If I'm working with an international student coming over here, they have to show they have a certain amount of money in the bank so that you just don't get here and you can't afford anything. So it's like 15 to 16 grand. So that's one thing you're going to have to do. But then, the other thing that's really new, and this has just been added within the last year, and it's referred to as the PAL. Now that's just an acronym, and it stands for Provincial Attestation Letter. Okay. Some of the people that work in Canadian admissions kind of complain. They say it's kind of a bit of a hassle. Of course, it's new, and anything new, you add another layer is, it's new, and you got to get adjusted to it. But you do have to get this PAL, this Provincial Attestation Letter, in order to apply. You can't really apply for the PAL until you're first accepted, enrolled, and then usually within the first week, the school will initiate the process for you to get this Provincial Attestation Letter. And once you get that letter, and this whole process, it can take a while to get your study permit. It can take up to 12 weeks. But you can actually get the study permit really when you even cross the border to come to school, or when you're on the plane before you come into the country. If you've got the PAL and you've got your acceptance letter, you're going to get the study permit. It's not really like, well, we may or may not approve. You're going to get it. I recommend doing it online ahead of time, just to not have to deal with that when you cross the border, is it can delay things. And so just go ahead and bang it out and use the online process and get it. But they have added that step. I'm not exactly sure why they've added it, but I do know this. Canada's absolutely exploded when it comes to immigration. And most of these are highly skilled, highly educated workers. Like when I go back there, and I get back there not that often anymore. Like I don't even get back there once a year anymore. When Dad's health wasn't great, he always made a point of getting back there at least once. But Mom's health is great, and she likes to travel, so she's happy to come here. She'll be with us for Thanksgiving for 10 days. So, but I get back there maybe once every 18 months or so. But I just cannot believe how many students, especially Asian students, Southeast Asians, South Asians, like you go to, this started happening when I was there, especially in Toronto, but it's just, the country's just so different. It used to be quite white. Now there's like lots of people of color and so many people from different backgrounds. So Canada's been very, very friendly when it comes to immigration, and especially tapping into highly skilled workers with skills coming over. And so I don't know. I don't know, what it is. I don't know what led to them adding this additional step. I don't know if there was some fraud. I don't want to speculate. I don't know. Let's get back to one of the major big benefits of studying in Canada, and that's what's called the postgraduate work permit. Now, this is pretty awesome. So if you come to school in the States, you're not necessarily guaranteed to be able to work here, not as a student, but also after you graduate. But in Canada, you're going to be eligible for the postgraduate work permit, and this allows you to work for 3 years full time while you're applying for permanent residency if you in fact want to stay. So if somebody wants to live in Canada, it's a great path, right? Go to college, get the work study permit, graduate, get the postgraduate work permit, and you've got it. You've got your path. And U.S. acknowledges dual citizenship, so you don't have to renounce U.S. citizenship. That's even if you pursue citizenship. But it's popular. It's on the rise. It's growing, and I think it's going to continue to grow. So I thought I would take a little bit of time to explain it to you. Sometimes people have complicated immigration situations, and every college in Canada does have an RISIA advisor. This is a Regulated International Student Immigration Advisor. They have at least one. They're very well trained. They're trained outside of the school. and they're kind of there. And sometimes they're the experts to reach out to, if you have questions. But thought you'd enjoy this overview of going to college in Canada. I've never really done it before. And when I was at the conference and they were talking about the rise of students going to Canada, I thought, well, I'm always looking for new content, something that maybe no matter how experienced you are, you're going to learn something. And no matter how much of a neophyte you are, you can follow us and we won't go over your head. That's always the goal. And obviously, if we can get the neophyte who's brand new and we don't put the cookies too high on the shelf that they can't follow, and then we can get that 45-year vet who's listening for professional development, then we're going to get everybody in the middle. And that's the goal. All right, friends, let me talk to you a little bit about David Hawkins and this interview that you're about to hear. I said quite a bit already in the intro, so I don't want to belabor too much, but David's held almost every imaginable position you can have at NACAC, and I'm going to let him talk to you a little bit more about some of the different titles and different roles that he's had at NACAC. But he's just a great guy. Anyone who knows him, he's a great guy. And I've wanted to have him on the podcast for a long time. And one of my secrets to getting my great podcast guests, by the way, is just to go to these conferences and just ask them right to their face, and they say yes. So I lined up a whole bunch of guests on this recent conference. I'm not going to tell you who they are, because sometimes from the time they commit to the time they come on can even be as long as 2 years. So I'm not going to do that anymore. I'll let you know when I've recorded an interview, if it's coming up. But yeah, David is in a brand new role that literally was created by Angel Perez and setting NACAC's strategic direction for the future. So I hope you enjoy this 4-part interview where we look at what is it that colleges value the most when they're deciding to admit students. What is the perception that high school students have as to what matters the most? And then what does that incongruity tell us? So we'll be exploring all of that over the next 4 weeks.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 1 of my interview, David gives his bio and he shares his current role. I introduce our topic, what does the research show about how colleges make decisions? And we look at factors involved in college admissions. David explains the history of the development of the NACAC State of College Admissions Report. David talks about how they gather the admission data for the report. David talks about what the number one factor is and how colleges make decisions. And then he kind of breaks the number one category up into 3 categories, all that carry significant weight. David explains how the top 3 categories overwhelmingly test things that matter to most of the colleges. And David shares the numbers to back this up. Then David shares the factor that comes in at number 4 that colleges rate when it comes to what's considerably important and moderately important. And David points out that they just recently started adding this factor in their survey, and it has already shot up to number 4. Listen and enjoy. Friends, you're in for a treat today. I'm here with David Hawkins of NACAC. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, David.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
I've wanted to interview you for about 6 or 7 years, so this is exciting for me. I think of David as the guy behind the State of College Admission Report, but that's really not doing him justice. David's been with NACAC for over 2 decades and been a leader of a number of initiatives. And currently, you've got a brand new title, I see, most recently. So, NACAC's inaugural Chief Education and Policy Officer. So why don't you just give us a little bit about your background, David, just so people understand the context in which you'll speak.
Sure. Thank you again, Mark. I have worked at NACAC now for going on 25 years. I started as the Director of Government Relations and Advocacy here, have eventually moved into research and then over to education and training, and now oversee all of those things, plus our DEI initiatives and our philanthropy initiatives. So you stay around long enough, and they ask you to do a few more things. But it's been
If you're doing a good job,
it's
only if you're
okay.
doing a good job.
I will concede that. Yeah, but it's been a fantastic run here, and I couldn't imagine working for a better group of people than the folks who are in the college admission counseling profession. This is just, I want to say that the people who are out there helping students and families just have their heads and their hearts in the right places, and it's just been a pleasure to work for this group for that long.
So what's the new role involved? Change of job description. What's the focus here with the new title?
Yeah, well, we went through an internal change about 4.5 years ago because our former CEO, Joyce Smith, who had been here for 30 years herself and was quite an institution in that regard, and she hired me way back in 2000. She retired, and so Angel Perez, who is our new CEO, came on and did some restructuring. And I think the one thing that he didn't have a lot of because of the pandemic and other changes that resulted was just someone who'd been around for quite a while and someone who knows the ins and outs of NACAC. So he offered me the position of Chief Education and Policy Officer. And as I said a minute ago, I had originally found my home here in government relations and research. As time went on, I got more into the education and training side of things, as well as the first two. And he just needed somebody who had a good sort of sense of where the content lies, where the issues are, sort of the softer side, if you will, of association business, and structured it such that we now have a 4-person leadership team plus Angel, who makes 5. And I was proud to take that offer as the Chief Education and Policy Officer. So it's a lot of oversight. It's a lot of trying to forecast the future, which, as you know, can be pretty challenging. And also just trying to make sure that we stay loyal to our mission and to the critical initiatives, including, not least of which, is a commitment to equity and access in all of our endeavors.
Well, before we get into our topic for the day, I have to say NACAC was fantastic in LA this year. And one thing I'm really pumped about, and I've said this multiple times to our listeners already, is, you're making that on-demand content available much longer. I talked to a NACAC employee at the conference, and he said there's a new vendor and it's a little bit easier now. And it's the kind of thing that our listeners are interested in. So I've actually been encouraging people to, if you can't make NACAC in Columbus next year, like, go on and get the on-demand content, because I could attend 6 sessions when I was there, but I'm going through them now, and you got those voiceovers with the graphs and the charts, and it's fantastic. So whatever your team's doing to expand that that on-demand content, I just want you to know I really appreciate that.
That's great. I know they'll be thrilled to hear that. And I'll just say, the pandemic was not great for a lot of things, for a lot of reasons. But one thing it did do is it proved that I think people are now ready to engage in a lot of more different ways than they used to be. And I think we've all sort of gotten accustomed to this format. And so we definitely want to make sure there's so much good content locked up in that conference. We want to make sure we can share it out with everybody.
Yeah, now let's talk about something that I absolutely love. I use it at least every other week with the family, and that's the State of College Admissions Report. What I love about this is, it gives me an opportunity to show data to a family about what really matters when colleges make admissions decisions. But why don't you, start out, maybe talk to us a little bit about the history of the study and the methodology of the study. Why don't we just start with that?
Yeah, sure. Well, when I came to NACAC in 2000, we didn't really have a research department. There was someone here who was doing research, but it was part of 3 or 4 other responsibilities that this staffer had. And so shortly after I started, one of the things I observed is that NACAC didn't have an annual report to the nation about what its membership does and the kinds of things that we are able to produce as the people who are at the center of this process. So I look on the newsstand. Of course, that was 25 years ago, but I look at the newsstand and I see all of these commercial books that are claiming to tell you how college admission works. I look at the field of data, of research in general, and I see that the Department of Ed has a little bit of data here and there, but it's 2 years behind. And really, the only report that was dedicated to admissions was something that the College Board and ACT were doing jointly in ETS with NACAC and our sister organization, ACRO, the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers. But they only did it every 5 years. And as someone who didn't start in college admission, I do not have an admission and counseling background other than the 2 decades plus that I've worked here. I thought, well, people go through this process every year. It's kind of like the weddings industry, right? That there's constantly people getting married. And so you see all these weddings books and, bridal things and all this. I felt like, first of all, that we needed information that was more up to date than every 2 or 5 years. And secondly, this is the really important part, is as I got to know NACAC members, people who work in college admission classes, they have a very powerful story to tell. So I just decided, look, we've got this survey potential. We've got members who are going to tell us, how this all works. Let's put it into a report that we can share out with the world. And I think the two most important issues that we've addressed with this are, number one, giving our professionals some tools to talk to students and families about it. Because I can't tell you how many times I have personally sat in on college presentations with my kids and just heard some completely off the wall stuff. And, of course, me being a NACAC staffer and sitting there in the back with fumes coming out of my head, ready to just jump out of my seat. But so providing a tool for professionals was our first goal. Our second goal, which has really been an added benefit, was to make sure that the public knew through the media, most importantly, because like sitting in on those college nights, I can read news articles and have steam coming out of my ears as well. So the media really has taken this report and run with it and see it as a valuable reference tool for them. So I felt like, most importantly, our members have a story to tell. Let's make sure we can do it, and let's do it with data so people can really understand. We can provide narratives, but we can also provide data to match.
Yeah, and we've got a mixed audience. There's admissions professionals who know exactly what we're talking about here, and I'm sure there's people who don't have a clue what we're talking about. So why don't you walk through, specifically focusing on state of college admissions, and sort of walk through the different categories that you've included, and sort of how you've sort of spread the word to colleges and who you've reached out to at the colleges. Why don't you talk a little bit about that process, now that you want to actually hear from admission officers about how they make decisions? Sort of what's the step? Like, are you going to VP of enrollments? Are you going to deans, directors, all of the above? And who are you sending it to? Then let's talk a little bit about the mechanics.
Yeah, sure. So basically what we do for the admissions data, we also collect data from high schools, but for the admissions data, we do send it to our key point of contact in the association. We ask them to share it with the senior most person in their office so that we can collect this data. One of the things that a lot of students and families might not know is that there is a thriving, I want to say industry. It's not exactly an industry, but there is a lot of people at colleges and universities and out in the world who deal in institutional data. There's such a demand for this, whether you're talking about policy or those books on the newsstand. So to take a step back, one of the things we did is we looked at all of the different places where we could get data so that we didn't have to ask colleges to reproduce it. So one important part of how we put this together is we take information from the U.S. Department of Education and sometimes from something called the Common Data Set. For students and families who have no clue what that is, anytime you look at a guidebook from U.S. News and World Report, Peterson's, College Board, they're all using the same data set. They collect it from the colleges themselves and then they publish it. And they have been willing to share some of that with us for this reporting. And then finally, we do go directly to the admissions offices and they get a survey and asking them these questions. And I'll take, for example, the one that we're going to talk about today is the factors in the admission decision. We just ask them and we promise them we're not going to share information by institution, right? We're just doing it in the aggregate so people get a sense of what colleges in general want. And then, of course, where there are differences, we will talk about those differences. So we asked them to fill out this survey, and we try to make it as painless as possible because, like I said, colleges get surveys all the time. And then what we do is we come in and we crunch the data, and we figure out if it's statistically representative, because we want to make sure we're not misleading people. In fact, that's one of the points of this research is to not mislead. So that's really important for us. And then we present it in the form of our report. And it really this factors in the admission decision item that we collect data about has been a perennial favorite. It is far and away the most salient and the most often demanded or often requested piece of information that we collect.
And let me stop you for a sec.
Yeah.
I was having like withdrawals because you guys didn't do it for a few years during the pandemic. And I was I can attest to that. And obviously, if you've been looking at it over the years, and I've been looking at it for I don't know if I went back to the first one, but close to it for a long time, and this should be the case, right? Most of the things that are revealed as the most important are pretty constant. But what I find fascinating, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, we can get into this later. I find fascinating seeing the things that are shifting over time and looking at which things are deemed more important than they were 3 years ago, 5 years ago, or less important. But before we get into that, David, why don't you kind of walk us through the for the current version, which factors were revealed to be the most important? And once again, these are admission officers telling you this is what we put the most weight on when we are making an admissions decision. And you maybe even want to break it down, because I know you have it in sections there. And I probably wish in some ways this was a webinar where people could see the visual, but I know you'll do your best to articulate people the way it looks, and then hopefully we'll tantalize them so that they'll go check it out themselves.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And a quick bit of background before I do, I'll just note that these factors are factors that we have, like I said earlier, looked at different sources to make sure that we have a good representative sample of what colleges actually do consider. We're not leaving anything huge off the table. So we've asked our members to add, and we'll talk about what's been added from time to time. And we've looked at those other data sets that I mentioned. So we hope this is at least at a high level representative of pretty much what the lay of the land is for admissions.
No, but I think that's an important point. So you basically say, hey, we've reached out to admission officers and said, hey, what are we not including in here that you'd like us to include? And so it's in a very inclusive, attempt to build out something that would be relevant to the public.
Exactly. So when you look at the most recent year's data, what you see is that far and away, it is the student's high school experience that is the most important factor in the college admission decision. And that is true for every type of college. It's true for public and private. It's true for highly selective and not selective, or less selective, I should say. I mean, it's important for non-selectives too, because you do have to have a high school diploma to enroll. But over time, at first we were just asking, sort of a student's grades in high school. And of course, that came in first. But over the years, as we've talked to admissions offices, we've actually split that concept into three different concepts. The first one being the high school grades overall. So, your overall GPA or what you see on
more
the
like
transcript.
A cumulative, what people would think of as a cumulative GPA that might include the cooking class or the gym class, everything. Yeah.
Exactly. And then we also broke out two other factors, one being the grades in college prep courses. So those courses being anything from advanced placement, international baccalaureate, dual enrollment, or even just courses that may not carry any of those labels, but are among those that the colleges consider to be college preparatory. So I'll take a chemistry or a physics or a calculus or even trigonometry or something like that, statistics. So the grades in those types of classes, interestingly, come in slightly higher than your actual cumulative GPA. So what that tells us is that the colleges are looking at the types of classes that students are presenting on their transcripts. And then the third breakout there was the strength of the high school curriculum overall. So you've got grades in high school, in college prep courses being the number one factor, really close on the heels, total high school grades in second. And then in third, this thing called strength of high school curriculum. And that is, I want to be careful because I know there have been a lot of horror stories about people chasing schools and moving districts to be in a quote unquote better school. No, what that actually means is that admission officers often do take the time to look at the curriculum at the high school. So let's say you didn't take calculus in high school and a college considers calculus important, or the same could be said of advanced English or writing or you pick a course. They then will have, generally speaking, access to information about the curriculum at your high school. So whether it's calculus or whether it's an advanced writing class, if they see that your school doesn't offer that, that's a really important consideration, because then they'll be in the position of saying, oh, okay, well, you took what was available at your school, and that's important to them, even if there aren't those classes that are available at other schools. So that it's an important qualifier that whatever high school you're from, colleges, especially the highly selective ones, will actually do the work of saying, okay, well, this student doesn't present these classes, but they weren't offered at their school, so we can't hold that against them. And we felt that was a really important factor to break out. And as we see in our survey results, it is, in fact, a very important part of the admissions decision-making process.
So quick question, David. So cumulative GPA, kind of similar to all classes. Is the second one similar more to like what a lot of times people call our core GPA or academic GPA, focusing more on like math, English, science, social studies, foreign language?
Exactly. Yep. That would be more what we call college prep courses in our survey. And maybe there's some language around that we can change to make it more clear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the third area in that top tier is, again, they do consider that the school that you went to, and does it even offer certain courses. So,
and why don't you share some numbers, because the numbers are pretty high for those three categories, right? There's a drop off after those top ones to the next one.
Yeah.
You want to sort of say which one's tested and, considered most important, some of that stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah. The way we ask the question is, do you, for each factor, do you attribute considerable importance, moderate importance, limited importance, or no importance? So they got 4 options. So we do get a sense of, okay, is there some middle ground in there that we need to know about? Well, for your what you called core academic courses, what we're calling college prep, 77% of colleges said that is of considerable importance, 15% moderate importance. So you've got 90+% of colleges out there, and there's a margin of error here of plus or minus 3 or so. So, but 90% plus of colleges consider those core curricular the most important. 74% attribute considerable importance to the grades overall, so to your cumulative GPA. Another 19%, so they're really almost even when it comes to those two numbers together, give those that overall GPA moderate importance. So clearly very important. Those are the top 2 by quite a bit. The strength of the high school curriculum, 64% say that's considerably important. Another 23 say that it's moderately important. So again, we're talking 80-90% of colleges saying, hey, this is really the most important thing that you're going to do in our eyes.
I like to make the point, and I know you'll get down to test scores when we get down a ways. A lot of times when I'm talking to families, and I sense that they think test scores are as important, if not more important sometimes even than grades. And I like to say, like, show me the schools that are transcript optional. I'll be waiting a long time, right? There are a lot that are test free and score free and test optional, but they're very few. You have your open enrollment schools, even they want to still see a transcript or proof for GED or something. So yeah, so those are the big 3, right? Grades in academic courses, overall grades and rigor. And those numbers are significantly higher than what comes in next.
Yeah, well, then at 28% of colleges told us that they consider positive character attributes to be considerably important. Another, my print is a little small here. Another 38% said that it was of moderate importance. So this thing that we call positive character attributes, this could be a lot, right? This could be
Sure.
social and emotional learning. This could be all sorts, grit. This could be things that are just kind of intangible about a student. But colleges are clearly looking at that, and that's something that you know colleges will often say that that's not something that can necessarily be you know be sort of gamed, or it's really something they're looking for in what the student has done again in high school. They might glean that from recommendation letters and other interviews and things like that, if they do interviews. So that's at the top of what we call the quote unquote tip factors. So you ascertain that a student is academically eligible to be admitted to your institution with those first factors. Then if you're a highly selective or moderately selective school, you're starting to look at these other factors that determine is this the fit with our institutional priorities for our class for the coming year. So positive character attributes comes in at the top of this list.
And stop you for a sec there.
Yeah,
I actually think that number's probably even higher than it is, and for a few reasons. One, like you mentioned it, right? Like things like interviews and the writing, like one of the most important parts of the writing is for me to figure out what the personal qualities are. So a lot of times when someone clicks writing, it's sort of another way of saying, I mean, sure, are you a good enough writer and does it look like you can put two sentences together? But so many times the value of the writing is what I learn about your personal qualities and your character. So
Yes.
someone might click writing when they also value the writing because of a lot of the PQs. And then the other thing that I would argue is, and I'd be curious about this because you guys have the research on this, when you have schools that I use the term admit by the numbers, right? Some schools call it guaranteed admissions, formulaic admissions of a grid. Those schools aren't going to count some of those factors on the list at all, right? Because it is more of a transcript review. But if you're talking about schools that are really doing full-blown holistic whole person admissions, I would contend those numbers may even be higher. Now, does your research show that for when you bring in schools that do holistic admissions or more highly selective schools, that some of the factors, and it wouldn't only apply here, I think it would also apply to things probably like writing and extracurriculars, things that some schools, they're not part of their review at all. It literally is just a transcript review, but then all the schools are kind of grouped together for the overall report. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right on the mark. No pun intended.
I just caught it.
You're right on the mark there. And where we see that is in two different places. Number one is like I said earlier, we do offer a no importance option. And as we go down the list, you'll see that an increasingly large number of institutions say these are not important at all in our admission process. So that's one place where you see it. The other place you see it is we do some statistical analysis to see if there are correlations between the type of institution we're looking at. So highly selective is one that we do, and the variables that we ask them about. And what's interesting to me is that pretty much every factor on this list becomes more important, is correlated with a higher degree of importance when you're talking about a highly selective school.
Sure.
So and then correspondingly, they're less, the relationship is less strong when you have institutions that aren't selective, or like you said, have a more standardized sort of admission process that really does focus on the numbers coming out of the high school experience. So definitely the case that if you're trying to work with a student or a family who is thinking about different types of institutions, know that if you're thinking about an institution that has a higher acceptance rate, accepts more students. And by the way, I should mention that one of my favorite statistics in this report is we do report out the average acceptance rate for selective colleges in this country. Most people don't realize it, but it's up around 70%.
Yeah, you guys did a great session on that at the conference. I'm going to do a whole segment on that. It's gone from 63 to 73 in the last 10 years. And it's just such a myth out there because of what gets all the clickbait. And, you don't, I always say, write an article on Stanford breaks record for most competitive, year, and you get a lot of clicks, and you write something on Samford and nobody clicks. And so that generates the buzz, and then it skews the public perception, right?
Right. And so for families for a large degree of our population, a large number of families that we work with from day to day, some of these factors are never even going to enter the equation. And it really is just the point of making sure you know what each individual institution. And that's where our members are such experts and can really just get in there and go, you can filter out all this crazy noise
Sure.
about what one Ivy League admission dean termed the lunatic fringe. So
Sure.
I've used that for years. So yeah, that's absolutely the case. And in the character space, a good, I'd say, let's see, it's 19 and 16. So a good 35% of institutions don't even really consider character traits or other things like that. So
Now, David, this is also one that wasn't on some of the reports in the past, isn't it? This
that's
is
right.
one you've introduced fairly recently, which I was
Yes.
thrilled to see in there, because I'm often saying like PQs are really important at schools that, especially at schools that deny more kids than they admit. And
That's
I
right.
was really thrilled. What's the history? Did that come from your admission officers, or who spoke up and said, "Hey, why don't you add personal qualities to the survey"? And what year did that get implemented?
Yeah, well, back in 2017, we were approached by a group called the Character Collaborative, which is a group of people who are in our membership mostly already, but who had formed this nonprofit that specifically looks at the examination of character in admissions. So at their request and in partnership with them, we added this into our factors in 2017. And what's fascinating about that is usually when we would add a factor to this list, it would come in somewhere near the bottom.
Sure.
Because we weren't really, it didn't feel like there was anything new under the sun, to quote King Solomon. But this character attribute jumped right up to, at the time in 2017, now remember this is pre-pandemic,
Yeah.
it jumped right up beneath the grades, all the 3 grade variables and the standardized tests at the time.
Sure.
What's fascinating to me is, given now that we're past the pandemic, test scores are, we're not going to talk about them for a few minutes here.
Yeah.
They're way down the list now.
Yeah, I think that's the most noticeable change in the last few years, is how test scores have plummeted in the feedback in the study.
Yeah. And since then, since 2017, we've obviously updated the data for 2023. And we see character attributes is now taken the place of where testing was for a very long time. And we have since absorbed the work of the Character Collaborative into NACAC to something we're calling the Character Focus Initiative. And the reason I wanted to bring that up briefly was just that we see here that 28 plus 38, so 66% of colleges are considering this either of moderate or considerable importance. And even though there's a lot of research around this and a lot of history in the admissions space about considering these kinds of factors, we still don't have a really firm grip on how to be fully transparent, how to talk about this in a way that is what I consider to meet a 3-pronged test. So legally, ethically, and educationally sound. That doesn't mean the institutions are out there doing wild things. It's just that we haven't sort of scaled everything up so that we can understand, speak a language that students and families can understand and it can be clearly communicated. So one of our focuses, particularly in light of the fact that the Supreme Court case that outlawed the consideration of race in admission as it's, as a single sort of factor, that we just want to know, how are colleges doing this? What is it that we can say about it, and how are we connecting this to the deep academic work that's going on about social and emotional learning, personal qualities, and character? So interesting background to that one, and it'll be fascinating to me to see where that goes in the next 5 to 10 years.
Friends, this concludes this segment of my interview with David Hawkins. We hope you join us next week for the next segment. Friends, on Thursday's episode, we've got a couple questions from a listener, and I can't tell you what they are just yet. I'm going to take a look at them and see what's the most urgent to the time frame here. We've recorded a nice batch recently. Not only with Susan did I record a batch, Lisa and Linda recorded a number of questions, and then we're introducing Hillary into our QFL. Now, she's not brand new because she's been part of the roundtable, but Hillary and I will have a series of questions that we're going to answer together. And so we'll have 2 questions from a listener, and then we'll continue with part 3, the interview with Jay Rosner, looking at how do you get the best score if you've made up your mind that you're going to take the test. And then, drum roll please, I teased it out on Thursday, Colorado State University Spotlight, Fort Collins, Colorado. And friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career success. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.